This is going to be our second class of the course that we have begun, which is titled as Buddhism and the Constitutional Law. And today I'm going to go a little bit uh, into Buddhism from the perspective of a course, because as we have seen in the last class, that Buddhism is not a small area. It's a huge domain, even if we want to study it in its different forms and its different schools. The Buddhism itself becomes a very, very vast body of knowledge itself. So what I thought today, to begin to introduce Buddhism in terms of the concepts that we will find useful in talking about the constitutional law and the other concepts that we are going to study in the upcoming classes. So even when we know that Buddhism is a vast domain of knowledge, and it transcends the barriers of the countries and cultures and languages and so on and so forth. Even then, the Buddha has made our difficulty much easier, because he himself has defined that the purpose or the goal of his Dhamma is to understand the suffering and the end of suffering. So throughout the course, I would request all of you to keep these two particular words in your mind: the dukkha and the end of the dukkha. So please keep these two words in mind: the dukkha and the end of the dukkha. So whenever we talk about the dukkha, what is it? What is it that we are talking about? So we are just going to look at this framework of the Four Noble Truths and how that fits into our scheme of understanding the relationship between Buddhism and constitutional law. So to begin with, what is the dukkha? And we as we saw in the last class, we all have some experience of the dukkha. We all have some experience of dukkha, and dukkha is universal. It's not something personal. It is not something that only comes to us, but it comes to all human beings. We all experience dukkha, isn't it? So dukkha is roughly translated in English as suffering, but we better leave it untranslated, because this word dukkha itself has become now accepted in some of the domains. So we keep this word dukkha, and one of the definitions of the dukkha, according to the Buddha, is something that is difficult to endure. Anything that is difficult to endure is dukkha. And there are many ways by which the Buddha has described dukkha. So one of the ways by which he has described the dukkha as dukkhata dukkha, means the suffering that is suffering. So for example, we have body ache, we have sometimes toothache, we have all different forms of experiences of dukkha. And the Buddha described this kind of dukkha like toothache or body ache, or whenever we have disease or something goes wrong with our body. This kind of dukkha the Buddha described as the dukkhata dukkha. The second way the Buddha described dukkha in terms of viparinam dukkha, means suffering that arises due to change, because nothing in the world is constant, nothing in the world is going to remain as it is. Everything is going to change. Therefore, the Buddha says that because everything changes, we experience suffering. So that kind of a dukkha, the Buddha called viparinama dukkha, the suffering due to change. And the third kind of the dukkha that the Buddha defined is the sankharic dukkha, the dukkha that comes into being because of the nature of existence, because the way the world is. Like, for example, what we can say is nothing can exist of its own. Everything is coming into existence because of the conditions, causes and conditions. So because everything arises depending on causes and conditions. So once those causes and conditions are gone, uh, the things changes, and everything is conditioned, as everything is compounded, everything is interdependent, everything is dependent on other things. So because of this conditionality, or what is called in Buddhism the causes and conditions, the suffering arises. So for example, to just give you an example of the causes and condition, suppose if we are living in an extreme cold without having much clothes, then we are going to suffer. For example, our body is composed of the what in traditional Buddhism called the five elements. And once the five element decay or they transform, we suffer. So, you see, the Buddha has tried to classify the dukkha in various ways. And traditionally, there is a formula where the Buddha has defined the dukkha as, jati pi dukkha, jara pi dukkha, vyadhi pi dukkha, marnang pi dukkham, appiyehi sampayogo pi dukkho, piyehi vipayogo pi dukkho, yam pi ichham na labhati tam pi dukkham, sankitena panchopadan khanda pi dukkha. This is in Pali. And it's not difficult to understand it. The Buddha has defined the suffering or dukkha in terms of jati pi dukkha, that the human birth, when we take birth, it's not easy, we suffer. So jati pi dukkha, jara pi dukkha. So whenever we get old, when we are old, we suffer because of the decaying of the body. Jara pi dukkha, vyadhi pi dukkha. So whenever we have sickness or disease, we suffer. Marnang pi dukkha. Of course, when we die, we suffer a lot. And appyehi sampayogo pi dukkha. So whatever we don't like, if we come in contact with that, we suffer. Appyehi sampayogo pi dukkho. Piyehi vipayogo pi dukkho. So whatever we like, if we go away from it, we suffer. And then the Buddha goes on define another aspect of the dukkha, saying that yampi ichham na labhati tampi dukkham. Means whatever we desire, and if we don't get it, we suffer, we feel suffering. And lastly, the Buddha says, and that's very important, and it actually connotes the sense of Buddhism. The Buddha says, Sankitena, means in a nutshell, Sankitena pancha upadan khandapi dukkha. The five aggregates of clinging is suffering. So these five aggregates are, according to Buddhism, they are called nama rupa. So all the time, this process of naming goes on. We are all the time naming, cognizing and naming something, labeling something. But whatever we label, they are just the concepts in our mind. They don't pertain to what is out there, because we cannot experience what is out there without the mediation of our senses and our mind. So this psychological aspect of our experiences in Buddhism called Dhammarupa, and the so-called physical aspects of our experience, like the body and the things that we see outside, or the things we touch, and traditionally they are called the rupa. And there are basically, if we try to compare it with the classification in science, such as liquid, solid, gases, and plasma, likewise in the ancient times, the people used to describe the constituents of the so-called physical or material world in terms of earth, water, air, and fire, and the sky, the space. So this is in a nutshell what is called the Pancha Upadan Khanda. I will give you the Pali name of that and also English equivalent. The Panchaskanda means Rupa, Vedana, Vidnyan, Sankhara, and Ved. Rupa, Vedana, Chetana, Sadhya, and Sankhara. Sadhya, Sankhara, Vidyanang. Okay, so this Sadhya, Sankhara, Vidyanang, and Vedana, these four form the psychological part of our experiences, and Rupa forms the so-called physical or material form of our experiences. So the Buddha says, Sankitena Pancha Upadan Khandapi Dukkha. So Buddha says that if we get attached to the names and forms, we suffer. So ultimately, we have to detach ourselves from the names and forms. So this is how the Buddha defined the suffering and the dukkha. But if we look at how Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar has categorized the word dukkha, it's very interesting and it's very contemporary. And I think that is how we will be understanding. Of course, it's derived from the various suttas that Babasaheb Ambedkar has studied, and this particular formulation or the categorization of the dukkha is very important because it will help us to understand the material that we will be studying in our course. So, for example, Babasaheb Ambedkar says that the dukkha is, of course, divided into the three kinds of categories. According to Babasaheb Ambedkar, there is a suffering which comes because of our personal action. So sometimes we behave with avidya or ignorance, or sometimes, or many a times, we our action, our speech is moved by ignorance, by the impurity of the mind, and because of that action, we suffer. And Baba Ambedkar has called that kind of the categorization of the dukkha as the personal dukkha, and um we can call it, Baba Ambedkar called it the so-called adhyatmic dukkha, or whatever pertains to oneself. The second categorization of the dukkha that Baba Ambedkar has given is the dukkha that comes into existence because of the social nature of the human societies. So in other words, it's called the samajik dukkha or the social dukkha. Okay, so the personal dukkha, the social dukkha, and the third kind of dukkha that Baba Ambedkar has enumerated in terms of the suffering, which is due to the conditions around us, due to the situations around us. Sometimes there is an earthquake, sometimes there might be environmental change, climate change, or whatever. So basically, you see, this way of looking at dukkha has implication on what we are going to study in the course. Of course, the way the Buddha has defined the dukkha, it's not just the way I have told you, but there are, in many sutras, the Buddha has defined the social conflict as the dukkha, and as the Buddha also described poverty as the dukkha. The Buddha also has talked about the dukkha to the women, the kind of dukkha that the women face, itti dukkha. Itti means women, and dukkha is suffering. And purusha dukkha, like why the men suffer because of their gender, because they have to join the army that time, and they were forced to do this work and that work, while the women had to undergo a lot of suffering, and so on and so forth. So you see, the Buddha hasn't had this limited way of understanding the dukkha. So when we talk about Buddhism, we are not just talking about the psychological suffering. So the Buddhism is so much psychologized these days that we miss this side of the dukkha that the Buddha taught. That there is a suffering because of the social structure. There is a suffering because of poverty. There is a suffering because of discrimination. There is a suffering because of identity, like the identity of a woman, identity of a man, and so on and so forth. So you see, the ambit of the dukkha is not limited. It includes everything that is difficult to endure. So when we are talking about the dukkha and the framework that we are going to use to understand many concepts that we are going to study in the course, we of course know that the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, and the Four Noble Truths are arranged like the way the doctors have arranged their medical treatment. So in the ancient India, the people, the doctors were talking about the disease, the cause of disease, the state which is freedom from the disease, and the protocol or a medicine that one needs to take in order to end that disease. So you see, these four noble truths are formulated in a very therapeutic way, and of course we can use this framework to understand how the dukkha arises, because that is what the Buddha asked us to train ourselves to understand the suffering. So you see the four noble truths: dukkha, dukkha samudaya, the cause of the dukkha, dukkha nirod, and the dukkha nirodhagamini patipada. In English, suffering, the cause of suffering, the freedom from suffering, and then the causes that leads to the freedom from suffering, isn't it? So you see these two pairs, dukkha and dukkha samudaya. So dukkha and the cause of the dukkha, nibbana and the cause of the nibbana. So this we generally call cause and effect, isn't it? And without having causes and condition, as we have seen, nothing can come into being. So if the dukkha arises, there must be causes and conditions. When the nibbana arises or nirvana arises, there must be causes and conditions. So we bear this thing in mind, that analytically we can understand the source, the causes and conditions of suffering, isn't it? Of the dukkha. The this formula for causes and condition in Buddhism is called paticca samutpada. So those who have not heard this term, they can take a note of this term called paticca samutpada. And paticca means depending, samutpada means arise, dependent, arising, isn't it? So everything in the world is arising dependent on something. Okay, please keep this simple word in our mind, paticca samutpada. Everything in the world arises depending on the causes and conditions. Hetu pachaya. So I'm going to just give you a small formula about paticca samutpada that we can use, in our methodology to study or understand suffering. Now the formula is very simple. This is, that is. This is, that is. This is not, that is not. With the arising of this, that arises. With the cessation of this, that ceases. Means everything is conditional, everything is relational. Okay. So for example, smoke arises because there is fire, isn't it? You can, this is true for everything in the world. Everything arises depending on the causes and conditions. There is no creator of the world. That's why the Buddha denied the creator of the world, because to understand the origin of something, we however hard we try to go to the first principle, we cannot go back to the first principle. So everything arises depending on the causes and conditions, and the causes and conditions are many. Sometimes there are significant causes, significant conditions, but there are so many causes and conditions that is very difficult to pin down to the particular cause and conditions. For example, now I'm talking, and because of this technology, because of this computer that I'm using, because of the organ of mouth that I have, the brain, and you got ears, you got your own devices through which you are listening through. So you see, even this act of talking to you through this technological means is dependent on so many causes and conditions. So many causes and conditions. For example, raining. We can never say that somebody is raining. We say it rains, because depending on the causes and conditions, the clouds are formed, and they are converted into vapors, and when depending on the temperature, we experience the rainfall. So you see, this is very important for us to understand this principle of the Buddha, or the law of everything. The paticca samutpada can be called the law of everything, isn't it? Because ultimately everything is relational. The reality is relational. It depends on how we look at it. But it's another implication of it is this, that depending on many causes and conditions, the things arise. So, for example, the Buddha has taught to see the Dhamma even in the stalk of rice, isn't it? So you see, for example, if you see a rice stalk that has emerged from the earth, there are uh, with seed as a condition, as a cause, the sprout arises, and then the sprout grows into stem, and the leaves, and the flowers, and the fruit, and so on and so forth. You see, so one thing leads to another. But because of the condition of earth, because there is a earth, that's why the rice can sprout. Because of fire, means the sunlight, the rice can flower. Because of the water, and so on and so forth. You see, so even in the small grain of rice, we can see the entire the principle of dependent arising. And that is what the Buddha taught, that nothing is independent, everything is interdependent. And that is what the Buddha has given in this very simple formulation. And I would like all of you to commit this beautiful formula in your mind, so that we can pull it anytime we need, if we have to analyze something. What are the causes and conditions of this? How does this particular thing has arisen? So you see, this formula goes like this: this is, that is, this is not, that is not, with the arising of this, that arises, with the cessation of this, that ceases. And this is the formula actually that we apply in science, isn't it? Because the science is always trying to find out the causes and conditions as to how the things arise in the world. And without this, no progress is possible. Without understanding this law of causes and conditions, no progress is ever possible. And that is what, on in the Buddhist parlance, this is called the paticca samutpad. Paticca, dependent on, samutpad, arising together, some utpad, coming into existence together, isn't it? So if you look at this formula of paticca samutpad, the Buddha says that whoever understands, it's not easy to understand this formula. The Buddha says that if anybody has understood the paticca samutpad, they have understood my Dhamma, the Dhamma. Even the Dhamma is not Buddha's Dhamma. It's a universal law. And whoever has understood the Dhamma has seen the Buddha, isn't it? So please bear in mind this very important formulation of what is uh, Paticca Samutpad, and I would like to request you to please keep this in mind. And I'm going to keep on revising and reminding about this beautiful formulation that the Buddha has given. So, of course, the method of the Buddha is to inquire, to know it, to understand it, to understand the causes and conditions. If something is happening in the world, what are the causes? What are the conditions by which certain things are happening in the world? Isn't it? So that's why the Buddha has always asked us to keep our minds very open to know, to understand. And therefore, I think this formulation of the Four Noble Truths, the dukkha, the cause of the dukkha, the end of the dukkha, that is nibbana, and the cause of the end of the dukkha, that is dukkha nirodhagamini patipada. If you keep this, see, the Buddha said that my Dhamma is in two words: dukkha, dukkha nirodha. Means dukkha and nirvana. Buddha says I teach two things: dukkha and nirvana. Okay, the suffering and the end of suffering. Now you see the dukkha and the cause of the dukkha, because nothing is going to happen in the vacuum. Everything is going to happen depending on the causes and conditions. So our duty is to expound and try to find out the causes and conditions of why certain things are happening. And the Buddha has gone into the understanding of the causes of suffering, particularly the psychological suffering that we experience. They are depending on what is called our attachment to the names and forms, nama rupa, upadan khanda. So I don't want to make it more complicated, because as we go on, we will be clarifying a lot of these terms that I'm using in the course. So this is what is the formulation of it. And this particular formula of causes and condition is also repeated in what is called the in the everywhere you go in the Buddhist sites, you find this formula coming into being, written everywhere. ए धम्मा हेतु पब्भवा तेसंग हेतु तथागतो आहो तेसंग च निरोधो एवं वादी महासमनो. So whatever the Dhamma means anything in the world that we can see or we can cognize, it's called Dhamma. So whatever Dhamma, a Dhamma hetu pabbhava, so whatever Dhamma has these causes of arising, tesang hetu tathagato ava. The Tathagato means the Buddha explains the causes of that, whatever arises. And tesang cha nirodho, and how they cease, the Buddha also teaches that. So Buddha teaches ultimately the cause, the law of paticca samutpad. So if we have to understand Buddhism in another way, to understand this paticca samutpad, but you see it's not just understanding the paticca samutpad. The Buddha says that we have to leave or break this paticca samutpad, the cycle of causes and conditions. You see, it's very beautiful if we understand it, isn't it? Because depending on the causes and conditions, the suffering arises. So if we want to end the suffering, we have to break this cycle of arising, the condition arising. So you see why I'm going into this discussion, because it directly pertains to the topic in our hand. Because the another way, as I told you, Baba Sahib Ambedkar has categorized from a different perspective. It's the same thing, but from a different perspective, so that it will be easily communicable to the world of today. We live in a world which is very political world. We live in a world which is dominated by the economic forces, which are so powerful, just like animalistically powerful economic forces. So Baba Ambedkar has categorized the dukkha in a way that we can understand, the suffering that comes because of our wrongdoings, our individual wrongdoings. So, we can call it personal suffering, or, let's call it adhyatmic suffering. Then there is what is called the suffering because of the social structure. And I'm going to use another term here, the structural suffering, the suffering because of the structures. So, for example, there are structures in the world which causes a heavy amount of suffering in the world. For example, the caste structure, the racism, the discrimination based on language, the discrimination based on genders, and the discrimination based on, you name it. The suffering because of the conflict in the world. Suffering because of the conflict in the world. It's very important for us to understand this formulation, because if you look at the way Baba Ambedkar has structured the Buddha and his Dhamma, it's a very interesting way, the way Baba Ambedkar has structured the Buddha and his Dhamma in terms of the conflicts in the society. The conflicts going on between the groups, the conflicts going on between the nations, the conflicts going on between the family members, isn't it? So in other words, if we talk about nirvana, in terms of in a very broad way, we are talking about the vision of nirvana in terms of what is called, generally what is called the Sukhavati, the land where there is no suffering. The great Ravidas called this kind of a vision of a society where there is no suffering as Begampura. Be means no, Gam means we know sorrow, and Pura is a city of no sorrow, isn't it? And the Buddha has, of course, has had this concept of Nibbana in terms of Sukhavati, the land of bliss. Kabir has this concept of Premapur, the land of love, the city of love, so on and so forth. You see, this Nibbana has been looked at not just in terms of one's own salvation, but in terms of the freedom of all, in terms of liberation of all the human beings, all the sentient beings in the world, not only in the world, in the universe itself. So you see, the Buddhism has this very the very unique concept, or the reality, I would say, of what is the end of suffering. So you see, the end of suffering has a broad connotations, because when Baba Sahib Ambedkar compared Marxism with Buddhism, he was talking about, the Marxism talks about exploitation, and the Buddha talks about dukkha. So exploitation, in terms of the Marxian reading of the world history, is because of the struggle between the classes, and one class of people exploits the another class of people, and that is how they defined exploitation. But if you look at dukkha is a very broad category, which also brings in the social conflicts, the conflicts due to classes, the conflicts due to conflicts between nations, the conflicts between even the members of the same family, between the families and families, between the tribes, and so on and so forth. You see, this conception of dukkha is of a great value to us in when we are studying this constitutional law in terms of Buddhism and constitutional law. So before I go on, let me summarize what we are looking into today is the aim of the Buddha Dhamma, or the purpose of the Buddha Dhamma, is to end the suffering. The end of suffering is the purpose of Buddhism. The goal of other religion might be different. They might be seeking some heaven, or they might be trying to avoid the hell. And we know that different religions have these different goals. But the goal of the Buddha Dhamma is to end suffering, dukkha nirodha. In other words, nibbana. And the nibbana is a very, very important principle, concept, important teaching of the Buddha. It is not something that has been has come into fashion in terms of experiencing some mental states and calling it nibbana. It's not like that. The concept of nibbana is very, very deep and vital for us to understand, because it gives the vision of an entirely different world. So keep in mind these things. One, the goal of the Buddha Dhamma, or the Buddha's teaching, is to end suffering. And the Buddha said that I teach only two things. I teach dukkha and dukkha nirodha. And the dukkha nirodha is nothing but nibbana. Dukkha and the end of dukkha. But if there is a dukkha, there is a cause and condition that gives rise to dukkha. If there is nibbana, then there are causes and conditions that gives rise to nibbana. And we know that what gives rise to nibbana is the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. And we will go into that briefly. But the formulation and the very essential teachings that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has categorized, so that we can cull from these vast resources of the Buddha's teachings available, and can focus on what pertains to our course. So you see this, as I said, that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has said that the Buddha has basically talked about 4 domains. So number one, the first domain is Panchashil, and the Panchashil is very important, because without Panchashil, the if individually, if we don't practice Panchashil, we suffer a lot, isn't it? But the Panchashil has also social implication. The Shila has social implication, because the root of the Shila lies in what is called because there are other human beings like us. That's why we have to practice Shila. If we are single being in the world, we might not need Shila. But the Shila is a relational. How do we correlate with other human beings? How do we relate with other human beings? There has to be some basis of relating with other human beings. And that basis of relating with other human beings is Panchashil. So actually, Panchashil, as we can see, is the manifesto of equality. Without Panchashil, there cannot be equality. Because the base of the Shila is metta, because we treat other human beings the way we would like to be treated. That's why the metta becomes the foundation of Shila. And in the scheme of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, the way Baba Sahib Ambedkar has understood the Metta and Shila and democracy, we are going to look into that, but I'm just going to give you some glimpse of it today. So Panchashila, as we know, the Panatipata Veramani, Adinadana Veramani, Kamesu Michachara Veramani, and Musavada Veramani, Sura Meraya Majja Pamada Thana Veramani. These are 5 principles, but these are the basis of everything good in the world. They are, as the word Shila connotes, the foundation. Without this foundation of shield, we cannot, end the suffering. We cannot create equality in the world. We cannot create what is called the fraternity in the world. We cannot create liberty in the world. So these 5 precepts are inexhaustible. The more we study, the more nuances of these 5 precepts we can find out, because they are so critical to us. Panatipata Veramani has the implication that we will never hurt other human being. Isn't it? In other words, we will cherish other human beings. We will not take what is not given to us. Adinna Dana Veramani. We will try to create the harmony in the society by not indulging into the gross sensuality. Then, we will not make any false claims, isn't it? And last is, we will keep our minds very alert and very, very, very clear. So if we are having under influence of any intoxicant, and the Buddha has described intoxicants in many ways, alcohol and smoking. It's just not like this. It includes that, but it's much more than that. We are intoxicated by wealth. We are intoxicated by youth. We are intoxicated by beauty. We are intoxicated by status, isn't it? So whatever intoxicates our minds, we have to, abstain ourselves from it. So you see, this Panchashil, a very important part of the protocol or plan to end the suffering, isn't it? And then Baba Sahib Ambedkar has given us the another sort of the list of the teachings of the Buddha, Noble Eightfold Path. And I know it will take a long time to go through the Noble Eightfold Path. That's why I have given you that file in the class group, that the Noble Eightfold Path constitutes of right view, freedom from superstition, right aims, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right perseverance, right mindfulness, and right contemplation. So we will look at all these elements as we move on with our classes. And then the Buddha talked about Nibbana itself, because without Nibbana we cannot practice the Noble Eightfold Path. And Nibbana, to experience Nibbana, there are some hindrances, 10 hindrances, which we all face, and removing those hindrances, we attain to Nibbana, and that is how we practice Noble Eightfold Path. And the last part of the Buddha's teachings is the 10 paramitas. So basically, that's what I thought, that we don't have to extend our inquiry into many areas when we are trying to look at the Buddha's teachings. The 4 areas, these are very important for us to understand the Buddha's teachings. In general, to practice in our lives, to practice in the community. But from the point of view of this course on what is Buddhism and constitutional law, please keep this basic teachings of the Buddha. Basic doesn't mean basic. Basic means that without which we cannot end suffering. Fundamentals means they are so fundamental, so elemental, that without which we cannot attain nirvana. We cannot have this Sukhavati. We cannot have Begumpura. We cannot have, Prempur. We cannot have the truly democratic society. So Panchashil, 5 precepts, the Noble Eightfold Path, the doctrine or teachings on Nibbana, and finally the 10 paramitas. So, we will go into all this in our upcoming classes, and but keep in mind this very important teachings of the Buddha, and if you get time, please read them through. If you have any questions, please put in the group, and we will try to discuss there. uh, Before I conclude, I would like to explain you something which I found is very important for us to understand the Buddha's Dhamma, and what has happened in India. See, I have been to Sanchi recently, and Sanchi is a complex of many Buddhist monuments. So it is not just one place called the Sanchi. There are, of course, three big stupas in Sanchi, but surrounding Sanchi area, there are like at least 5 to 6 known Buddhist sites, just 25 in the radius of 25 kilometers. So one archaeologist has studied this whole terrain around Sanchi, and her name is Julia Shaw, and she says that the Buddhist monks were not just otherworldly, because whenever we talk about Buddhism, we talk about otherworldliness, to attain nibbana and just go away from the world, nothing to do with the world. No, Buddhism or the Buddhist monks have everything to do with the world. That is what the Buddha taught his disciples, to strive hard for Bhojan Hitai Bhojan Sukhai. And in the first class, we have seen that is how the Buddha has defined his Dhamma. Bhojan Hitai Bhojan Sukhai Lokanukampai. So now, coming back to this archaeological site of Sanchi and many surrounding sites around Sanchi, what she discovered was that the Buddhist monks were in the forefront of what is called the land management and the water management, isn't it? So the Buddhist monks were actually, involving themselves in what we call today the public work. And before the modern times, in the traditional countries, or Buddhist countries like China, Japan, Sri Lanka, and in Thailand, the Buddhist monasteries were the most important places in the towns and the villages, because they kept all the land records. They they were the places where the children go. Children went for their studies to learn the alphabets. The Buddhist vihars were the centers of medicine. They were the centers of dispute resolution, and anything, if there is a conflict in the society, in the village, they will go to the Buddhist monastery. So they were like, they were not otherworldly the way the picture is being painted, that the Buddhism was otherworldly and has nothing to do with the society. No, the Buddhist monks had everything to do with the society, and that's what we see in the places like Sanchi. The irrigation system, the way the water was irrigated, and the way the land was managed, not of one village, but the entire, like 1,000 square kilometer of area was completely managed by the Buddhist establishment. And that is something that shows that the monks or the Buddhists have an extensive responsibility towards how they can better the world. In other words, if there is no irrigation of water irrigation, there are no irrigation projects, the farmers are going to suffer, the food production is going to suffer, and because of that, the human beings are going to suffer. If there is a disease and if there are no medicinal plants. So you see, if you go to all or most of the Buddhist establishments, you will find it surrounded by the medicinal plants. When there was an excavation in Takshila, they've discovered these small equipments of surgery, of doing these minor operations. So the Buddhists were not only the engineers of the time, but they were also the doctors. They were tending the ill people. It was a refuge place for women. The Buddhist, the Sangha of the nun was a place where the women could find the safe refuge in the world, isn't it? So you see, if you look at even the history of Buddhism, from the Buddha to even Baba Sahib Ambedkar, and in between Ashoka. If you look at the Ashokan polity, which was completely based on welfare of his citizens, what Ashoka brought in the world is very unique, because he demonstrated how Buddhism, has a function in the world, how it can help the humanity to reduce the suffering. And we know that because of Ashoka, the Indian subcontinent flourished with a speed that was unimaginable. There were public gardens in this country. There were hospitals, not only for the human beings but also for the animals. There were, the medicinal plants were planted all over the places, including on the highways. You see, so and the Buddha and Ashoka had a special minister to look into the welfare of the women, isn't it? So you see, what I'm trying to convey here is the Buddhism has everything to do with ending the suffering. That is what the Buddha says. The purpose of my Dhamma is to end the suffering. He didn't classify like this, that to end only psychological suffering, to end only a particular kind of suffering. The Buddha didn't qualify. He said dukkha, and he said dukkha nena khamatiti dukkhang. Something which is difficult to endure is suffering. So, of course, the caste system is difficult to endure. Of course, the racism is difficult to endure. Those who are facing suffering because of it. The gender discrimination is difficult to endure, isn't it? So this broadening of understanding of the dukkha is very important, for the Buddhism to survive in the modern world. If I'm talking wearing my Buddhist affiliation, but forget my Buddhist affiliation. If I am trying to make sense of the suffering in the world, why there is a caste system, why there is a racism, why there is an inequality, why there is this unequal distribution of wealth, isn't it? Why there is so much of a suffering in the world today? And that is the question that we should flag all the time. And the Buddha says that your inquiry must begin by exploring what is suffering. Suffering has to be understood. Many a times we suffer, but we just hide it. We just put it under the carpet. We don't want to look at the suffering. And the Buddha says the causes of the suffering has to be understood. So Buddhism is also a mechanism to understand the causes of suffering, because the Buddha taught about the conditionality. The Buddha talked about the causes. The Buddha taught that nothing, comes into existence out of nothing, isn't it? Nothing comes into existence in the vacuum. There are always causes and conditions. And once the causes and conditions are removed, that particular thing which has arisen ceases. So for today, I think this is the brief sketch that I wanted to give you as a way of understanding the Dhamma, the Buddhism, what we call Buddhism or Buddha Sasana, whatever we call it. But without understanding the dukkha and the end of dukkha, the causes of the dukkha and the causes of the end of dukkha, and then the understanding itself, the paticca samutpad, this is, that is, this is not, that is not, with the arising of this, that arises, with the cessation of this, that ceases. We cannot have a framework to participate in the great mission of the Buddha, to create a world as Sukhavati, to create a world where there is no sorrow, to create a world which is full of bliss and love, to create an enlightened world. If we use the word that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has used, the Prabuddha Bharat. So you see, all this ties together in terms of the constitutional law. What law should govern the people, isn't it? And we are off to a very, very exciting journey now, henceforth, to relate with this modern laws. For example, when we talk about in the context of India, liberty, equality, fraternity, and justice, and how that can be traced in terms of underpinning in the Buddhist values, and how much contradiction there is. On one hand, we talk about Prabuddha Bharat, the enlightened India, or the truly democratic India. And on the other hand, we see that, it's not so. So how Buddhism and the constitutional vision go hand in hand, and how we can correlate that. How do we conceptually understand in our context the Constitution of India as the continuation of the vision of the Buddha and Ashoka and Baba Saheb Ambedkar up to our own times, and our own responsibilities. So I thought this brief sketch will give you an idea of what Buddhism we are talking about in terms of the essence of Buddhism. And I would like to request you all to please go through the material that I have sent in the group, and read it through, and raise questions, because the Buddha has said we should always question everything, isn't it? Including his teachings, including his own Dhamma. And let's keep on inquiring, more understanding, getting more into details of the concepts and ideas that I have been talking from the last two classes, and I have been talking in the future classes. And then for more contemporary issues, Dhananjay Vanjari sir will come into play, and he will conduct his classes. So we are off to a very exciting journey, and you can see that how important is this even the idea of linking Buddhism with the constitution, isn't it? It's not some people claim politicizing Buddhism, because they have very limited idea of what constitute Buddhism. Buddhism is very deep, very subtle, but at the same time it's so broad. It has such an implication for the humanity that we can just get a glimpse by looking at the history of Buddhism. Imagine the world without Buddhism, and you will understand how important it is for all the humanity to understand the Buddha's teachings. So I will stop here, and I will open up the class for any comments, any discussion, anything that you would like to interact or share. Yes, Dara. Dara?
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, Dara, please.
Sir, if we see Buddhist state like Myanmar and Sri Lanka,
Yes.
They have committed some worst atrocities against minorities like Rohingya Muslims and Sri Lankan Tamilians.
Yes,
and Buddhist monk in Sri Lanka preaching like will make Sri Lanka only home for Buddhists. So how do we see the extremist ideology and nationalism? It is like us versus them with Buddhism linking.
Yes. See, when your question is very important, Dara, because that is the question I have often faced from many sides when we are talking about this particular line of thinking, Buddhism, and how to create a better political system, economic system, better social systems, and so on and so forth. So these examples of Burma and even Japan nowadays and Sri Lanka has been, see, the first thing the Buddha taught is to have a right view. And right view means not taking any extreme positions, isn't it? So any position, even the Buddha says that, don't hold on to my Dhamma. Don't hold on to my Dhamma, because my Dhamma is like a raft, which should be used from going from this shore to that shore. The Buddha says that even please do not get attached to my teachings. What you are supposed to do is to practice them, put into practice. So, for example, the word Buddhism is very unfortunate, because it connotes some kind of an ism, isn't it? So, because of the lack of this word, any better word, I have used this word in English, Buddhism, but it's not ism of a sort where you take a position, isn't it? The Buddha said that Buddha has never taken any position. He says that I have no quarrel with the world, because I have no position to defend.
Yeah.
Okay.
Too much attachment.
Exactly. So what has happened? This a lot of people have tried to use Buddhism for the nationalistic purposes. isn't it? Like, for example, you see in India, the phenomenon of Hindu nationalism,
Yes.
isn't it? So every this teaching has this danger of being pulled into a political game or like that, isn't it? The Buddhism that we are talking about, we are talking about the values, we are talking about liberty, we are talking about equality, we are talking about fraternity,
Yes.
isn't it? So of course something has gone wrong into the histories of this country, isn't it? And that doesn't mean that we can blame the Buddhism, because there are many examples within these countries where Buddhism has played a very vital role,
Yes.
isn't it? So you see what I'm trying to get it at. If you hold on to anything as an ideology or as a fundamentalist ideas, you see Buddha, for example, has said that even don't take what is given in Tripitaka as it is. You examine it,
Yes.
isn't it? So I think what these countries need is to going back to the basic teachings of the Buddha, and that is what Baba Ambedkar was talking in the Buddhist conferences. He was saying that we have to go back to the Buddhism and reconstruct the political systems, social systems, and so on and so forth. But the people have just attached to Buddhism in terms of as a religious idea, in terms of my tradition, my culture, like that. But if you look at Buddhism in terms of the evolutionary sort of a way to help human beings to evolve, to help human societies to go to the higher planes of existence. If you look at Buddhism like this, from the angle of paticca samutpad, as creating the causes and conditions in the world, which will end the suffering in the world, you get a very complete different understanding of Buddhism. Do you understand, Dara, what I'm saying?
Yes. Also, the origin of life is a question in science. Buddha says conditions were right for it from Praticca Samutpad. If we see what could be the reason for the origin of life, so and from the Praticca Samutpad, Buddha says the conditions were right.
Hmm. But Dara, there is one thing. We can change the conditions, isn't it? The why Buddhism works is because the Buddha has given the ultimate responsibility in our hands.
Hmm.
He said that it's not fatalism, that this is the cause and this is the effect. No, isn't it? There are
Yes.
there are conditions which we can change.
Some we can't, and some we can.
Yes, so those we cannot change. We have to bear with them. So, for example, now let's talk about our contemporary example of a caste system. So,
Hmm.
caste system is something which is not natural. Is it natural?
No.
It is man-made, isn't it? So, if we create conditions, we can end it,
Hmm.
isn't it? So, we don't have to take caste system as a fait accompli. We cannot take anything that is created by the human agencies as something sacrosanct, as something which is never going to change. Many conflicts in the world which create unnecessary suffering that can be ended.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, we'll look into it more, Dara, as we go on.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dara. Manesh ji.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Manesh
Sir
ji.
JB, good afternoon.
Good
Sir,
afternoon.
up till now, whatever Buddhism I have understood, there were many misconceptions. And today, first time I came to know, like Buddhist people, Buddhist monk, they used to stay. I was under impression they used to stay away from the society. They had nothing to do with the society. The point I learned today, they were concerned about the society. They were
Yes.
doing the planning for the society, starting from irrigation, then medicines and everything. So
Yes.
this is something which was misconception, and this was the thing which was I was not aware. So this is
Right.
something new learning for me today.
Yeah.
So this really surprising. I would say it's really surprising. Up till now, I was just thinking Buddhist people, they used to stay away from the society, but they were very much concern for the society, they were cause for the society. So this is the addition to my knowledge. And one thing, sir, I would like to request you to
Please.
please highlight something more on attachment. What Buddha said about the attachments.
See, actually, attachment is the cause of all the suffering, isn't it? For individually, we know that if we attach to something for a long time and that thing changes, then we suffer, right? But when we
Yes.
look at the attachment to the views, like when we look at the society, the people are attached to views, isn't it? And they are so much attached to their views that they are even ready to kill other people for that view. So, for example, religious ideas, people are so much attached to their religious ideas that they will, kill other people, right? So, attachment to anything, to the views, to the ideas, as
Person.
person is ultimately going to lead to suffering. And that's why the Buddha says, Nama Rupa, Pancha Upadan Khandapi Dukkha. So any ideas that we hold on to, any forms that we hold on to brings us suffering, causes the suffering in the world. That's why the Buddha talked about the inherent flexibility, the shunyata, that there is nothing to hold on to. And when our mind is not holding on to anything, it is a free mind. Right? So we'll talk about more about attachment, because attachment is not just a psychological state, but it's also about people attaching too much to their caste, people attaching too much to their languages, people attaching too much to their religious ideas, gods and goddesses, and so on and so forth. And it
Too much to their own principles also.
yes, isn't it? So that's what causes the that's what the Buddha says. I have no view. I have no conflict with the world. The world is in conflict with me. I have no, because I am attached to nothing. Okay, Manish, we will look into it more in the upcoming.
Yes, sir, thank you so much.
Thank you, Manish. Anyone else? If not, then we will end the class here. I request you to kindly go through the material that I have given in the class in the WhatsApp group, and we will keep on talking and discussing more and more on these things. So see you in the next class.
Hello.
Sunita ji.
Ji sir.
Yes, Sunita.
Sir, can I ask a
Please,
question?
please.
Sir, Buddhism and social, how can we explain this as a interdisciplinary, sir?
You see, as we are talking in this class, the Buddhism is all about ending suffering, right? And we know that the suffering is not just due to our own wrongdoings. Of course, we experience suffering because of our own wrongdoings, but there are structures in the world, like for example the caste structure, like for example the racism, or even to some extent, or to a great extent, capitalism, unbridled greed, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So for example, if we are talking about the three poisons in Buddhism, the greed, hatred, and delusion, now we see greed, hatred, and delusion in terms of the institutionalization of the greed. So if you look at the capitalistic model of running after profit, is, we can say, institutionalized greed, isn't it? If we talk about just an example, the propaganda machines which create delusions among the masses, isn't
Yes.
it? Like the mass media that have such a tremendous impact on the minds of the people, completely deluding them, not letting them think,
Okay.
isn't it? So that's the institutional delusion, isn't it? Spreading wrong ideas.
Yes.
Then when we are talking about the institutional hatred, we know that there are a lot of ways people have institutionalized terrorism, the way people are terrorized, right?
Yes, sir.
Based on this hatred. So even the concept, the greed, hatred, delusion, if you look at it very carefully, they are social. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. Interdisciplinary we can write on social.
We can definitely write. Now Buddhism is a factor which you can factor in any discipline. You know, people are writing about Buddhism and sociology, Buddhist anthropology, and Buddhist psychology, of course, is a very vast field now. It's a domain in itself, and the people are writing about Buddhist economics, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes.
People are writing about even Buddhism and physics, whatnot.
Yes, social, political science, psychology, economics, yeah, all the things.
So that is the aim of such a course, to enable a lot of people to bring these ideas that, we will be exploring more into various domains.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right, Sunita?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Good. All right, then see you in the next class next week, the same time.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.